Liam had always prided himself on the solid foundation he had built with Sarah. Their life together, in the small but cozy suburban neighborhood in Ohio, was everything he could have asked for. They were a team, partners in raising their two children, Emma and Lucas. The house they had bought together was small but full of life, each room holding a memory of love, laughter, and family moments. There were the birthdays spent in the kitchen, the late-night talks on the back porch, and the quiet weekends spent with the kids, building forts or making pancakes. To Liam, their life was everything he had ever wanted. They had been married for 13 years. It wasn't always perfect, but it was real. There had been the usual ups and downs, work stress, the occasional fight about finances, and the tension that came with raising children. But those were the things Liam thought every couple went through. The idea of betrayal had never crossed his mind, not once. He trusted Sarah, and in return, he had always tried to be the husband she needed. They had built something together, a life, a family, and it was unshakable. At least, that's what he thought. That all changed on a Thursday afternoon. Liam had taken the day off from his construction job to surprise Sarah. She had been working long hours as a teacher, and he thought it would be nice to take care of dinner for once. He had picked up all of her favorite ingredients, planning to cook a special meal. He imagined her surprise when she came home, the kids already in bed, the house filled with the smell of comfort food. It would be a simple evening, just the two of them reconnecting, like they used to before the pressures of daily life had started to chip away at their time together. But as soon as Liam walked through the door, something felt wrong. The house was eerily quiet. No sounds of the TV, no background noise of the kids playing or Sarah humming in the kitchen. He called out her name but got no response. It wasn't like Sarah to leave things undone. He found the groceries still in the bag, and the front door was wide open. Strange for a Thursday afternoon. Liam's heart began to race as he stepped deeper into the house, his mind racing with confusion and a gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. And then he saw her. Sarah was standing in the living room, packing a suitcase. The sight was so out of place it didn't register in his mind at first. He froze in the doorway, trying to process what he was seeing. Sarah, his wife of 13 years, was packing to leave. There were no tears, no fighting, just a quiet, deliberate act of packing her things. The wedding ring that had been on her finger for over a decade sat coldly on the counter. The room seemed to spin as Liam's mind struggled to make sense of it. "Sarah, what's going on?" "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice shaky. He didn't know if it was the shock or the overwhelming sense of betrayal, but his mind could barely process what was unfolding before him. Sarah didn't flinch or pause in her packing. She didn't even look up at him when she spoke, her voice flat and unemotional. "It's over, Liam. I'm leaving. I'm with him now." The words hung in the air, each one like a blow to his chest. It took all of his strength not to collapse in front of her. "Who?" he managed to ask, though he already knew the answer. He had seen the signs, the late nights, the unexplained absences, the whispers from friends who had seen her with someone else, but he refused to believe it. Sarah didn't answer him. She just kept packing, each movement so methodical and calm. "He listens better than you ever did," she said, finally glancing at him with those cold, distant eyes that he used to know so well. It was like looking at a stranger. A stranger who had taken everything he thought he had. His heart raced, his breathing quickened, and for a moment he felt like he was suffocating. He wanted to scream, to shout at her, to demand an explanation, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just stood there, frozen in shock, as she calmly zipped up her suitcase and started walking toward the door. The sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floor was the only thing that seemed real in the chaos swirling inside him. "Sarah, please." "Don't do this," Liam said, his voice barely a whisper, the words heavy with desperation. But she didn't stop. She didn't even look back. The door clicked shut behind her, and that was it. Just like that, she was gone. Liam stood in the hallway, the silence of the house pressing down on him. His hands trembled as he reached out to touch the doorframe. He couldn't believe it. His wife, his best friend, the mother of his children, had just walked out of his life. The sound of her leaving echoed in his mind, a reminder that everything he had built with Sarah had just shattered in an instant. The minutes passed in a blur as Liam stood there, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. He tried to call her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He left a message, his words desperate, pleading with her to come back, to explain, to talk. But the message was cold, emotionless. It wasn't her voice that answered him anymore. It was something else. Liam didn't know how long he stood there, staring at the door, feeling as though his entire world was falling apart. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. The only thing that kept replaying in his mind was that one phrase she had said before leaving. "I'm with him now." It was like a knife in his chest. His mind kept going back to it, the words ringing over and over. How could she do this? How could she leave him for someone else? Someone who didn't even know their children's names. Someone who didn't know the small, intimate things about their life together. He stumbled to the kitchen and poured himself a drink, the cold whiskey burning as it slid down his throat. He needed something to numb the pain, to dull the ache in his chest, but nothing could numb the hurt. Nothing could take away the sense of betrayal that gnawed at his soul. The room was silent now, except for the sound of his own thoughts. He had to make sense of this. He had to figure out how to move forward, for himself, for his kids. But as the hours stretched on, all he could think about was the emptiness left in Sarah's wake. The emptiness that felt like it would swallow him whole. Liam sat there numb in the silence of the house that once echoed with laughter and love. He couldn't move, couldn't process the reality of what had just happened. Everything felt as if it had shattered in an instant, and yet the world outside carried on as if nothing had changed. His wife, Sarah, was gone. No warning, no fight. No apology, just the empty space where her presence had once been. It was almost as if she had never been there at all. Liam stood up and walked slowly to the living room window, staring out at the dimming sky. The late afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. The kids would be home soon, Emma and Lucas full of stories from their day at school. He could already picture them running through the door, excited to tell him about their friends, their projects, their little victories. But now, how would he face them? How would he explain to them that their mother was no longer there? That the family they knew was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it? The weight of it all pressed down on him. He wasn't just losing Sarah. He was losing his sense of stability, his identity. For years, he had defined himself as a husband, a father, and a provider. The love he had for Sarah was the foundation of everything he had built in his life. Now, it was all slipping away like sand through his fingers. Why? Liam whispered to himself, staring out at the empty street. He had always tried to be the man Sarah needed. He worked long hours, made sure the bills were paid, and did his best to be a present father. He thought he had been doing everything right. And yet, here he was, alone in a house filled with memories of a love that had just been extinguished. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone vibrating on the coffee table. He picked it up and saw a message from Sarah. His heart skipped a beat. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe she was coming back, realizing how much she had taken for granted. But when he opened the message, his hope was crushed. It was just a simple text. "I'm with him now. Don't call me again." The words felt like a slap across the face. There was no hesitation in them, no room for negotiation. It was final. And it hit Liam harder than anything he had ever experienced. His stomach churned and his head spun. He closed his eyes, trying to breathe through the overwhelming wave of pain that threatened to drown him. He put the phone down and walked to the kitchen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the familiar burn of the alcohol doing little to numb the agony gnawing at him. The silence of the house was deafening, and it felt like his world was collapsing in on itself. How could Sarah do this? How could she leave him for someone else? A man he didn't even know, a man who didn't understand the life they had built together. Liam's mind raced as he thought about everything that had led up to this moment. There were signs, small cracks in their relationship that he had ignored. The late nights, the distance, The moments when Sarah had seemed distracted, when she had been less present, less affectionate. But he had always brushed it off. He thought it was just the pressures of life, of work, of raising kids. They had been married for so long, after all. Marriage had its ups and downs. He never thought it could end like this. The sound of the front door opening jolted Liam out of his thoughts. He looked up to see Emma and Lucas standing in the doorway, their backpacks slung over their shoulders. They looked up at him, their faces bright, full of the energy and innocence that only children could possess. "Hi, Daddy!" Emma shouted as she ran over to him, throwing her arms around him in a hug. Lucas followed behind her, grinning widely. Liam swallowed hard, forcing a smile as he bent down to hug them both. "Hey, kids." "How was school?" he asked, his voice tight. "It was good," Emma said, pulling away from him to tell him all about her day. Lucas nodded enthusiastically, eager to share his own little adventures. Liam tried his best to focus on their stories, but all he could think about was Sarah. "Where's Mommy?" Lucas asked, his brow furrowing slightly. Liam froze, his heart sinking. He had hoped they wouldn't ask. He had hoped he could keep up the illusion a little longer. But the truth was there, hanging in the air between them. "Mommy's not here right now," Liam said, his voice steady but strained. He hated the way the words sounded coming out of his mouth. He hated that he was the one who had to explain this to them. "Where is she?" Emma asked, her voice soft but full of curiosity. She needed some time away," Liam said, the lie feeling heavy on his tongue. He didn't know how to tell them the truth. How could he explain to them that their mother had left them? How could he make sense of something that didn't make sense? Liam could see the confusion in their eyes. They didn't understand. How could they? To them, Mommy was just Mommy, the one who kissed their foreheads before bed, who helped with homework, who cooked dinner every night. They didn't understand that things were changing, that their world was about to be turned upside down. "Well, can we call her?" Lucas asked, his voice hopeful. Liam took a deep breath, forcing a smile. "Not right now, buddy, but we can try later." The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. He could see the uncertainty in their faces, but they didn't press him any further. Instead, they went on with their day, trying to make sense of the new normal that was already settling in. But Liam couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut, the relentless ache of betrayal that wouldn't go away. Later that night, after putting the kids to bed, Liam sat alone in the living room. The house was still and quiet, the weight of Sarah's absence more pronounced now. He ran his hands through his hair, trying to make sense of everything. The emotions that had been building inside him since Sarah left were starting to boil over. Anger, pain, confusion. All of it tangled together, making it hard to think clearly. His phone buzzed again, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Meet me tomorrow. We need to talk about what's next." The message was brief, but it left Liam with more questions than answers. Who was this person? And what did they want to talk to him about? He had a sinking feeling that the storm wasn't over yet. In fact, it was only just beginning. The following morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. The house was still silent, save for the hum of the city outside. The kids were still asleep, and for a moment he found himself savoring the quiet before everything changed. The weight of the situation still pressed on him, and the questions that had been plaguing him since Sarah left hadn't gone away. How could this happen? How could she just walk away from everything they had? A family, a life built together over the years. His mind replayed the conversation with Sarah's lover, Silas Dubrian, over and over again. "She's with me now," the words echoed in his mind, and every time they did, it felt like another stab to his heart. There was no remorse in Silas's voice. There was no apology for the destruction he had caused, just cold, detached confidence, as if he had won a victory. But Ethan knew one thing for sure. This was far from over. He wasn't going to let Sarah and Silas walk away unscathed. He had always been a calm and rational man, but now he was feeling the stirrings of something else within him, a determination to protect what was still his. His children, his life, his dignity. After sending the kids off to school, Ethan made his way to Winter and Levanter LLP, the law firm where Silas's lawyer worked. He had spent hours preparing for this meeting, going over all the evidence he had collected, piecing together the fractured reality of what Sarah had done. The affair, the lies, the betrayal, all of it was now laid out in front of him like a jigsaw puzzle, each piece sharper than the last. The polished marble lobby of Winter and Levanter LLP was just as cold and sterile as the rest of the building. It felt like stepping into a world of power and control, a world where everything had a price tag, including people's emotions and relationships. Ethan took a deep breath before walking in, his footsteps echoing on the hard floors. Preston Levanter, the lawyer, was waiting for him in a sleek, glass-walled conference room. Ethan recognized the man immediately, tall, sharply dressed, and exuding the kind of cold, professional detachment that made Ethan's blood boil. He knew this was the man who was going to help Silas tear his life apart. Ethan sat down across from Preston, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't here to negotiate. He wasn't here to make deals. He was here to reclaim what was rightfully his. "I understand you've had time to think about this," Preston said, his voice smooth and practiced. "I've thought long and hard," Ethan replied, his tone just as calm, just as measured. "And I've decided that there will be no compromise, not with my children's future, not with the family I've built." Preston's smile didn't waver, but Ethan could see the flicker of something behind his eyes. The man wasn't as confident as he appeared. Ethan was certain of that now. "I'm not interested in playing games," Ethan continued, pulling out a folder from his briefcase. He opened it slowly, making sure Preston saw each document inside. "This is the evidence I've gathered. Proof of the affair, proof of Sarah's betrayal, proof that Silas is using his influence to manipulate her into making decisions that hurt my children." He slid the folder across the table, letting it sit there in front of Preston, knowing the weight of it would be enough to make the lawyer reconsider his stance. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside the windows. "I'll give Sarah the condo," Ethan said, his voice cold now. "But not without conditions. She can keep her belongings, but the proceeds? Those are mine. And as for custody, the children stay with me." Preston leaned forward, a slight tension in his posture. "You're being aggressive," he said, his voice dipping slightly. "This doesn't have to be adversarial, Ethan." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "It's not about being aggressive. It's about protecting my children, and I will not let her manipulate them any further." Preston sat back, his hands resting on the table. The air between them was thick, charged with the weight of what was being decided here. "Let's be clear," Ethan said, his voice unwavering. "If Sarah wants to fight this, she will lose. I have everything I need to prove my case, and I will not back down. I will fight for my children, for their future." Preston's expression faltered for a moment, and Ethan saw it. Just a flicker of uncertainty. This wasn't a fight that Preston had expected. "You tell Silas," Ethan continued, his tone low but firm, "that if he ever wants to speak to me again, he'll do it through my lawyer. No more games. I won't tolerate it." Preston opened his mouth as if to say something, but Ethan stood up, his movements deliberate, and without another word, he walked out of the room. The battle had just begun, and Ethan Hayes wasn't about to let anyone take his family from him without a fight. The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings, and paperwork. Ethan wasn't just fighting for his rights, he was fighting for his children, for their future. Sarah's silence only fueled his resolve. He couldn't help but wonder how someone could turn their back on a family, especially one that had been built on years of trust and shared experiences. How could she leave? And worse, how could she move on so quickly with someone like Silas? But there was no time to dwell on those questions. He had work to do. The lawyer's office was full of chatter and activity as Ethan met with his attorney, Rob Kinley, to prepare for the custody battle ahead. He was determined to ensure that his daughters, Lena and Mira, would have the stability they needed. He would not let them be pawns in some game between two selfish adults. We need to keep things focused on the kids, Rob said, flipping through a stack of documents. The courts will look at their best interests, and if we can show that you are the more stable parent, that will work in your favor. Ethan nodded. I've already started gathering evidence, the texts, the bank records, the proof that Sarah has been seeing Silas for months now. We need to make sure everything is documented. He had already compiled an impressive dossier of evidence. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about showing that Sarah's actions had destabilized the family, that her emotional absence from their daughters' lives could be harmful. Ethan wasn't just trying to prove that she had betrayed him. He was trying to show the courts that she was unfit to care for their children. As the days went by, the tension between Ethan and Sarah grew. She refused to speak to him directly, always sending her lawyer to communicate with him. She didn't even call to check on the girls. Ethan had to make the hard decisions now. There would be no more running from the truth. There would be no more excuses. One afternoon, Ethan found himself walking into a familiar courtroom, the weight of his responsibilities heavy on his shoulders. The gavel slammed down, and the proceedings began. Preston Levanter, the lawyer representing Sarah, was already seated across from him, his expression unreadable. Ethan remained calm, his nerves steely as he listened to the legal arguments being made. It was clear that Preston was trying to paint Sarah as the victim, that she was merely trying to find herself after years of neglect. But Ethan knew the truth. She had chosen her path. She had made her decisions. The court has to consider the best interests of the children, Preston was saying, his voice smooth, rehearsed. My client has expressed a desire to remain involved in their lives. She is committed to being a good mother. Ethan leaned forward, cutting through the lawyer's words with his own calm yet firm tone. And what about the last 6 months? He asked. What about the fact that Sarah chose to prioritize her own desires over the well-being of our daughters? She hasn't been there for them. I have. He could feel the weight of every word. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about getting back at Sarah for what she had done to him. This was about showing the court the truth. About showing them the love he had for his daughters, the stability he provided, and the lengths he would go to in order to protect them. I'm not here to attack Sarah, Ethan continued. I'm here to protect my children. I am their father, and I will always put them first. The courtroom was silent for a moment, the air thick with the tension of what was to come. The judge nodded slowly, taking in what had been said. Preston glanced at his client, who was sitting with her arms crossed, her face flushed with emotion. But there was no turning back now. After a long session, the court recessed for the day. Ethan stood up, his mind racing with everything that had been said. He knew the battle wasn't over, but today had been a step in the right direction. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but he would fight with everything he had. As he left the courthouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah's absence had become more than just physical. It had become an emotional void, a gap that he would have to fill for the sake of their children. But at least now, he wasn't fighting alone. He had his attorney, his family, and his own strength to rely on. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Hayes felt like he was back in control. He wasn't going to let Sarah or Silas take away what mattered most to him, not without a fight. After the first round in court, Ethan found himself staring down a situation far more complicated than anything he had ever imagined. It wasn't just a divorce or a separation. It was a fight for his daughters, for their future, and for the life that was slipping from his grasp. Each court appearance, each legal maneuver, felt like another weight on his shoulders. He was learning quickly just how much power money and influence could have when it came to breaking down a family. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let his children become collateral damage in the war between him and Silas. The next meeting with Preston Levanter, the lawyer representing Silas, was set in the sleek, cold offices of Winter Levanter LLP, a high-powered law firm that reeked of old money and privilege. Ethan had been there a few times before, but today felt different. Today, it wasn't just about making the right decision. It was about making the right choice to protect his family. As Ethan walked through the polished marble halls, he felt the weight of his resolve grow heavier. His daughters' faces flashed in his mind. Their innocent eyes, their smiles, their need for stability. The thought of them being tossed into this mess, made pawns in a game they didn't understand, filled him with a deep, burning determination. The receptionist, a young woman with a practiced smile, didn't flinch when she saw Ethan. She had likely seen dozens of people like him, wealthy, powerful, desperate to maintain their image. But to her, he was just another client, another case. Mr. Hayes, Mr. Levanter is expecting you, she said smoothly, her voice devoid of emotion. It wasn't an invitation. It was just protocol. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. As the young associate led him into the conference room, Ethan took in the surroundings. The sleek, modern space was decorated in dark hues of blue and gray, its minimalist aesthetic serving to enhance the cold atmosphere. There was a palpable sense of power in the room, but also a distinct undercurrent of tension, an undercurrent that mirrored the turmoil Ethan felt deep inside. Preston Levanter was sitting at the head of the table, his posture perfect, his demeanor polite but distant. The moment their eyes met, Ethan saw a flicker of recognition. Preston had dealt with clients like Ethan before, powerful, determined, and unwilling to back down. But there was something different about Ethan. He wasn't here to play games. He was here for his daughters, and nothing would stop him from ensuring they had a future, a safe future. Mr. Hayes, Preston said with a tight smile, rising to shake Ethan's hand. His grip was firm, but there was a subtle hesitation in his movements that didn't escape Ethan's notice. I trust you've had time to think over our previous discussions? Ethan didn't sit immediately. Instead, he took a moment to assess the room, the situation, and Preston. The lawyer wasn't acting like someone who was in control. He was on edge, just as Ethan had expected. Silas's money and influence had their limits, and it seemed like Preston was beginning to understand that Ethan wasn't just another passive participant in this mess. Ethan had power too. He just needed to use it carefully. I've thought about it, Ethan replied, his voice calm and steady. And frankly, I don't like what I'm hearing. I'm not interested in playing your games, Preston. This is about my family, my daughters. Not Silas, not you, not anyone else. Preston didn't respond immediately, but Ethan could see the subtle shift in his posture. The polite mask slipped for just a moment, and Ethan could almost see the gears turning in the lawyer's mind. It was clear now, Ethan wasn't someone who could be manipulated. He wasn't someone who could be intimidated into silence. Mr. Hayes, I understand your position, Preston said finally, his voice softening. But we have to be realistic here. The courts will likely side with Sarah. She's the mother, and they will favor her in matters of custody. Ethan shook his head, his expression hardening. Sarah? You mean the same Sarah who has been emotionally absent for months, if not years? The Sarah who has already moved in with another man and left her children behind to chase after whatever makes her feel good? Preston's eyes flickered, and Ethan saw the faintest hint of discomfort. The truth was, Silas's relationship with Sarah wasn't as simple as they had made it out to be. There were lies, betrayal, and emotional manipulation at play, things that Preston couldn't ignore, no matter how skilled a lawyer he was. I'm not saying it's ideal, Preston said after a long pause, but we need to take a practical approach. The courts will look at stability, and unfortunately, your situation is complicated. Complicated? Ethan repeated, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. My daughters have stability. They have a home with me. They have consistency. Sarah has run off to find herself, and she's dragging them into the mess. There's no stability in that. I won't let her destroy their lives just to play house with Silas. The tension in the room was thick. Preston leaned back in his chair, clearly rattled. Ethan's words had hit their mark. He wasn't just another man caught in a divorce. He was a father fighting for his children's future, and that was something Preston couldn't easily dismiss. We don't have to escalate this, Preston said, his voice softer now. We can settle this quietly. You get visitation rights, Sarah gets what she wants, and everyone walks away from this relatively unharmed. Ethan's gaze never wavered. I'm not interested in walking away, Preston. This isn't about settling. This is about doing what's right for my girls. And if that means I have to fight to the bitter end, then that's what I'll do. Preston's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Ethan saw a hint of fear in the lawyer's expression. He knew that Ethan wasn't just another client. Ethan was a man with purpose, and that purpose was to protect his daughters at all costs. Ethan stood up, his decision made. Tell Silas that I'm not backing down. If he wants to play this game, he's going to lose. And when it's over, I'll make sure my daughters are safe, no matter the cost. As he walked out of the room, he could feel the weight of the moment settle in. This wasn't going to be easy. But Ethan Hayes had made a promise to himself and his daughters. He wouldn't break it, no matter what. Ethan had never thought he would find himself in a situation like this, fighting not just for his marriage, but for the stability and future of his children. He had spent 16 years with Sarah, building a life, a home, and a family, but now it all felt like it was slipping through his fingers. It wasn't just a matter of divorce anymore. It was a battle for the very soul of his family, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Over the next few weeks, the battle grew more intense. Ethan's lawyer, Rob Kinley, had been working overtime to ensure that every detail was accounted for. The more they dug into the past, the more they uncovered. Sarah's affair with Silas, the months of lies and deception, the financial assets she had been hiding. It wasn't just about who would get the house or the car anymore. It was about ensuring that his daughters wouldn't grow up thinking this was normal, that this was how relationships ended. They needed stability, something that Ethan could offer, something that Silas could never provide. Rob had sent over the paperwork for the next legal step. The terms were simple. Ethan was seeking full custody of the children, a reasonable request given Sarah's emotional instability and the fact that she had already made a new life with Silas. She couldn't be relied upon to provide the steady, consistent environment their daughters needed. The evidence Rob had gathered, along with Ethan's calm, determined demeanor, gave them a fighting chance. The next hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday, and Ethan prepared himself for what would surely be a long and draining day. As he walked into the courthouse, the weight of the situation hit him again. The marble floors and the cold, high ceilings were nothing more than a backdrop for the battle of his life. But Ethan wasn't intimidated. He couldn't afford to be. He had his daughters to think about. They needed him now more than ever. He walked into the courtroom with his head held high, his eyes scanning the room. Preston Levanter, the lawyer representing Silas, was already there, speaking quietly with Sarah. She looked tired, worn out, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt no sympathy for her. She had made her choices, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. Sarah looked up when she saw Ethan, her expression unreadable. She didn't look surprised to see him. Instead, there was a quiet resignation in her gaze, as if she had known this day would come. But Ethan wasn't looking for anything from her, not apologies, not remorse. He was only looking for one thing, his daughters. The judge walked in, and the room went quiet. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the decisions that would be made. This wasn't just about him and Sarah anymore. It was about what kind of future their daughters would have. Would they grow up in a home torn apart by deceit, or would they be able to rebuild their lives on a foundation of truth and stability? Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Debrian, the judge began, his voice deep and formal. We are here today to discuss the matter of custody. I understand there have been a number of motions filed on both sides, and I would like to hear from each of you regarding your requests. Preston Levanter stood up first, his suit sharp and his voice smooth as silk. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Dubrian, is requesting joint custody of the children. She believes that her emotional bond with them as their mother is vital to their well-being. She has made significant changes in her life, and we believe that she is now in a better position to provide a stable environment for them. Ethan's jaw tightened. The idea that Sarah could suddenly be in a position to offer stability was absurd. He had the evidence to prove it. Sarah's new life with Silas wasn't about stability, it was about running away from responsibility, but he knew that his words alone wouldn't carry much weight without proof. It was time for him to make his case. He stood up slowly, his voice calm but firm. Your Honor, I do not deny that Sarah is their mother, but the facts speak for themselves. Over the last several months, she has been emotionally absent from their lives. She's been in and out of relationships, prioritizing herself over the well-being of our children. She's abandoned them when they needed her most, and now she's living with a man who has no interest in being a father to them. I am the one who has been there for them every step of the way. I have been their stability, their protector. I have never once turned my back on them. Ethan paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. The courtroom was silent, every eye on him. He could feel the judge's gaze, but he didn't break his focus. This was his moment. He had to make it count. I am asking for full custody, Ethan continued. Not because I want to take them away from their mother, but because I want to give them the life they deserve. A life filled with love, consistency, and stability. They deserve to grow up knowing that they are cared for, that they are safe. I can give them that. He sat down, his heart pounding in his chest. He had said what needed to be said. Now it was up to the judge to decide. But deep down, Ethan knew that he had done everything he could. He had fought for his family, and that fight wasn't over yet. The judge nodded, making a note of everything that had been said. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, he said. Mrs. Dubrian, I understand your position, but I believe we will need further evidence to make a final decision. I'm going to schedule another hearing for next week where we will review all the evidence presented. In the meantime, I encourage both parties to consider mediation to see if we can reach a settlement. As the proceedings wrapped up, Ethan stood up and walked out of the courtroom with his head held high. It wasn't over yet, but this battle was far from lost. He had the truth on his side, and he had his daughters to fight for. That was all that mattered. The days leading up to the next hearing felt like an eternity. Every minute seemed to drag on for Ethan as he prepared himself for the next step in this battle. His thoughts were a constant whirlwind of emotions: anger, fear, frustration, but also a quiet resolve that had become a steady anchor in the storm. He wasn't just fighting for his marriage anymore. This wasn't about winning or losing a legal battle. This was about the future of his daughters, their safety, their well-being, and the life they deserve to have. Ethan's home, once filled with the laughter and chaos of family life, was now eerily quiet. He had not heard Sarah's voice in days, but he knew she was out there, living her new life with Silas, oblivious to the upheaval she had caused. He wondered how they could live so easily in the wreckage of everything they had once shared. Did she even think about the children? Did she think about the life she had torn apart? But even as he questioned her choices, Ethan remained focused. He was not going to let her actions define the future of their children. He could not and would not allow them to grow up thinking that betrayal was the way relationships were supposed to end. His daughters, Mira and Lena, were resilient, but they needed stability. They needed a father who could give them that, who could be their rock in this storm. The morning of the next hearing arrived, and the tension in Ethan's chest was palpable. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie and staring at his reflection. He had never felt more like a stranger in his own skin. The man staring back at him wasn't the man he had once been, the husband, the protector. But he knew that this transformation, painful as it was, had been necessary. The old Ethan had to die so the new Ethan could rise. Are you ready, Dad? Lena's voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned around to see his daughter standing in the doorway, her backpack slung over her shoulder. She looked up at him, her expression serious for a girl of only 10 years old. He knelt down and smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. I'm ready, he said softly, trying to reassure her, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. How about you? Lena gave him a small smile. I'll be okay, Daddy. We'll be okay, right? Ethan's heart tightened in his chest. She was so young, but the weight of their broken family had already begun to show in her eyes. He wanted to promise her that everything would be okay, but he knew better. He could not promise her anything he couldn't control. He gave her a reassuring hug. We're strong, Lena. We're going to make it through this. As the family made their way to the courthouse, the drive was filled with an uncomfortable silence. Mira, the younger of the two, had already fallen asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, his mind racing with the potential outcomes of the hearing. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not now. Not with everything on the line. The courthouse loomed ahead as they pulled into the parking lot. Ethan parked the car and sat there for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. This was it, the moment where everything would either start to fall into place or shatter completely. When they entered the courthouse, Ethan felt the weight of every eye on him. He could sense the whispers from the other people in the waiting room, the sympathetic looks, the judgment. He wasn't sure which hurt more, the pity or the indifference. But he ignored it. He had bigger things to focus on. Inside the courtroom, things quickly became tense. Preston Levanter was already there, sitting at the table with Silas by his side. Silas looked confident, his usual self-assured demeanor in place, but Ethan could see through it. He knew the cracks were starting to show. Silas wasn't the rock he appeared to be. He was a man on the edge, clinging to a life that was unraveling faster than he could control. When the judge entered, the room grew quiet. Ethan stood up, his heart pounding, and made his way to the front of the room. He felt a surge of determination as he sat down at the table with his lawyer, Rob. This was his chance to make his case, to show that he wasn't just a father fighting for custody. He was the man who could offer his daughters the future they deserved. The proceedings began, and as the lawyers made their opening statements, Ethan's mind wandered. He thought about the first time he had met Sarah, how they had fallen in love, built a life together, and had children. He thought about their wedding day, how she had looked at him with so much hope and love in her eyes. But now, all of that seemed like a lifetime ago. The woman he had married was gone, replaced by someone he didn't recognize. And the man sitting next to her, Silas, was a symbol of everything that had broken their family. He knew what he had to do. He had to stay calm. He couldn't let his emotions get the better of him. When it was his turn to speak, Ethan stood up. He cleared his throat and addressed the judge. Your Honor, I stand before you not just as a husband fighting for his family, but as a father who wants what is best for his children. My wife— He paused, the words catching in his throat. Saying my wife still felt wrong. It was as though Sarah was no longer his, no longer part of his world. My ex-wife, Sarah, has made choices that have irreparably hurt our family. She has been emotionally absent for months, prioritizing her own desires over the well-being of our children. Ethan paused, collecting his thoughts. He knew how hard this was going to be, but it had to be said. She has left me and our children to start a new life with someone who is not a father figure, someone who does not care for them the way I do. Shav. And now, she wants to share custody, but I cannot allow that. Our daughters deserve more than what she has given them. They deserve stability, love, and consistency, something that I can provide. He turned to look at Silas, who was sitting at the table across from him. Silas, you've made it clear that you want to be part of this family, but you're not their father. You never will be. You're a man who has used my wife to fulfill your own desires, and now you're trying to take away what is rightfully mine. My daughters. The words were out, and Ethan could feel the weight of them hanging in the air. He had said what needed to be said. Now it was time for the judge to make his decision. The days after the court hearing were long and exhausting for Ethan. He could feel the weight of the legal battle growing heavier each passing day. He had been fighting for his daughters, for their stability, for the life they once shared as a family. But despite all the evidence, despite all the work he had put into ensuring the best possible future for them, the battle was far from over. Sarah had no intention of giving up. Her lawyer, Preston Levanter, had made it clear in their last meeting that Sarah wasn't about to back down without a fight. Ethan knew the real battle was about to begin. His thoughts were consumed by the endless legal strategies, the custody agreements, and the emotional toll it was all taking on his daughters. They had already suffered so much, and yet it felt like the storm wasn't over. It was one afternoon when Ethan received a call from his lawyer, Rob Kinley. Ethan, I think we need to prepare for the worst. Rob's voice was grave on the other end. Sarah has filed for full custody again, and she's pulling out all the stops. This time, it's not just about her wanting more time with the girls. She's using every angle she can to undermine you. Ethan's mind raced, but he steadied himself. What's her strategy? She's claiming that you've been emotionally distant, that your job has taken priority over your family. We'll need to counter this with as much evidence as we can. Start collecting records of your involvement with the girls, school events, doctor appointments, anything that shows you've been an active and present father. Ethan clenched his fists. He couldn't believe Sarah was stooping to this level. She was using their children to manipulate the system, playing a dangerous game. It hurt him deeply, but he wasn't going to let her win. He had come too far, and his daughters deserved better than to be used as pawns in their mother's game. Over the next few days, Ethan tirelessly gathered evidence. He went through every detail of the girls' lives, pulling out photos, records, and notes that showed he was there for them in every way that mattered. He was at their school plays, their parent-teacher conferences, their medical checkups. He had never missed a moment of their lives, and now it was time to prove it. One evening, as Ethan was organizing the pile of documents in his study, Mira and Lena came running into the room, their laughter echoing through the house. The sound was like music to his ears, and for a brief moment, all the stress melted away. His daughters were his everything. The house had been quieter without Sarah, but he had filled it with as much love and support as he could. "Dad, can we go for ice cream?" Mira asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Ethan smiled and put down the papers. "Of course, let's go." As they drove to their favorite ice cream shop, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Despite everything that had happened, he was still their rock. He was still their father, and nothing would ever change that. Sarah's attempts to tear them apart were failing. They were stronger than she realized. The next day, Ethan had a meeting with Rob. As they sat in the lawyer's office, Ethan's mind was focused on the one thing that mattered most: his daughters. "Rob, I've got everything," Ethan said, placing the pile of documents on the table. "Every single school event, every doctor's visit, every moment I've shared with them. We need to hit Sarah hard with this. She's trying to tear us apart, and I won't let that happen." Rob nodded, looking over the documents. "You've done everything you can, Ethan. We'll make sure the judge sees the truth." The court date was set for the following week. It felt like the longest week of Ethan's life. Every moment, every second, was filled with anxiety as he waited for the final decision. He kept reassuring his daughters that everything would be fine. "We're a family, and no one can break us," he would say. When the day finally came, Ethan and Rob arrived at the courthouse early. The room was packed with people, most of whom were strangers. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he walked past the other families, trying to avoid eye contact. This wasn't just a legal battle for him. It was about his children. It was about his future. As they waited for the proceedings to begin, Ethan couldn't help but glance at the door where Sarah would eventually walk in. He didn't know if she was going to show up with her lawyer Preston, but he knew it wouldn't matter. He had everything he needed. He had his daughters, and he would fight for them with everything he had. The doors opened and Sarah walked in, her head held high, a cold expression on her face. Her eyes met Ethan's, but there was no warmth in them. There was no remorse for the pain she had caused, only determination. Ethan stood tall, unshaken. He wasn't here to fight her, he was here to fight for what was right. As the hearing began, Ethan could feel the tension in the room. This was it. This was the moment that would define their future. The courtroom was tense, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Ethan sat at the plaintiff's table, the legal papers spread out before him like the blueprint of a battle he never asked for but was forced into. His lawyer, Rob Kinley, sat beside him, his eyes scanning the room, analyzing every detail. Across the room, Sarah and her lawyer, Preston Levanter, were seated with an air of calculated confidence. They had come prepared, and Sarah's cold stare never left Ethan, as if daring him to challenge her. Ethan glanced over at his daughters, Lena and Mira, who were sitting in the front row with his sister. Their faces were hopeful, but they didn't fully understand what was happening. They didn't know how much was at stake, how their world was about to shift once again. His heart clenched at the thought of them being pulled into this. They had already suffered so much. This wasn't just about him and Sarah anymore. It was about the future they would have and who would shape it. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. The proceedings began with the usual formalities, the reading of the motions, and the questions of custody. Ethan's nerves were steady. He had prepared for this day, but there was still a tightness in his chest. He couldn't lose his girls. No matter what happened, they needed to stay together. They had been through enough, and Ethan was determined to protect them, no matter the cost. Preston Levanter stood up first. His suit was sharp, his words smooth. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Sarah Hayes, is seeking full custody of her daughters. As you can see, she has shown nothing but dedication to her children, despite the disruptions in her personal life. She is a loving mother who deserves the chance to rebuild her family and give them the life they deserve." Sarah, sitting beside her lawyer, kept her head low, her eyes fixed on the papers in front of her. Ethan couldn't help but notice the smug expression on her face, as though she was already counting the victory in her mind. She didn't care about the girls' well-being. This was about winning. This was about control. And Ethan knew he had to prove that. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he rose from his seat with a quiet strength that made even the judge take notice. "Your Honor, I have been a constant in my daughters' lives since the moment they were born. I have never missed a school event, a doctor's appointment, or a milestone. I've always put them first, and I will continue to do so, no matter what happens here today." Ethan paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. He could feel the eyes of the judge, the court clerk, and even Sarah's lawyer on him. He wasn't just fighting for custody, he was fighting for his daughter's future, for their stability, for their peace. "I am not here to tear down Sarah," Ethan continued, his voice steady. "I am here to make sure our daughters are given the life they deserve. A life with both parents involved, a life where they can grow up without being used as pawns in a game they never asked to be a part of." Preston stood up, his eyes narrowing. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Hayes is impugning the character of my client without basis. This is an emotional plea, not factual evidence." The judge nodded, but his gaze lingered on Ethan for a moment longer. "Sustained. Please stick to the facts." Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He turned to the judge, his eyes steady. "I have submitted evidence, Your Honor. The girls' school records, medical appointments, photographs, and personal accounts all show that I have been an active and present father. I am not asking for Sarah to be stripped of her role as a mother, but I am asking that we maintain shared custody so that both of us can continue to be involved in their lives." Ethan's words hung in the air. The room was still, the tension palpable. He had put everything he had into this argument. It wasn't about winning. He knew he couldn't control that. It was about proving that he was the better choice for the girls, that his love for them was unshakable, even in the face of betrayal. After what felt like an eternity, the judge spoke. "I've heard both sides. This has been a challenging case, but the most important factor is the well-being of the children. The court will take a brief recess to review the evidence and make a determination." As the court took a recess, Ethan sat back down at the table. His mind raced. What would the judge decide? He couldn't allow himself to think negatively. He had to stay focused, stay calm. He glanced at his daughters once more, their innocent faces unaware of the heavy burden being placed on them. The break was brief, but it felt like an eternity. Ethan sat still, his mind racing over every detail. His lawyer, Rob, had reassured him, but doubt still crept in. This wasn't just about legal battles or paperwork, it was about his daughter's future. It was about ensuring that no matter the outcome, their lives wouldn't be torn apart by the chaos that had already consumed so much of their family. He clenched his fists, silently praying that the judge would see reason. After what felt like an excruciatingly long pause, the judge returned to the bench, her eyes scanning the room as she sat down. She cleared her throat, signaling that it was time for the court to resume. "After reviewing all the evidence and hearing the testimonies, I am ready to make a ruling." the judge began, her voice firm and measured. This case has been emotionally charged, and I understand the pain that both sides have endured. But the best interest of the children must be the focus here. It is clear that both parents care deeply for their daughters, but the question is, who can provide the most stable environment for their growth and well-being? Ethan could feel his heartbeat quicken. This was it, the moment that would determine the course of his family's future. The judge paused for a moment before continuing, her gaze shifting between Ethan and Sarah. In reviewing the evidence provided, I have found that Mr. Hayes has consistently been present in his daughters' lives. He has provided for them emotionally, physically, and financially. His involvement has never wavered, even in the face of significant personal distress. Ethan held his breath as the judge turned to Sarah. Her expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Uncertainty, maybe? As for Mrs. Hayes, while it is clear that she loves her children, the evidence presented suggests that she has not been as consistent in her role as a mother, especially in the last year. Her actions, both personal and financial, have raised concerns about her ability to prioritize the needs of her children. Ethan exhaled slowly, relieved, but the judge's words didn't stop there. However, the judge continued, I must also take into account the bond between mother and child. It is not my place to sever that bond entirely. Therefore, I am granting joint custody with Mr. Hayes having primary physical custody. Mrs. Hayes will have visitation rights, and I will strongly encourage therapy to help facilitate a healthy co-parenting relationship moving forward. Ethan's heart surged in his chest. He had won. The girls would remain with him. His primary concern, his first and only priority, was always their well-being, and now he would continue to protect them with everything he had. The judge's gavel came down with a resounding thud, signaling the end of the proceedings. Sarah stood, her body stiff, her face flushed with a mixture of disbelief and anger. She had lost. She hadn't expected this outcome. For so long, she had been convinced that she would be the one to walk away with everything, her family, her life, her control. But it hadn't worked out that way. Ethan had been patient, meticulous, and now it was all coming to fruition. She exchanged a final look with Ethan, but there was no triumph in his gaze. There was no smug satisfaction. Instead, he simply looked tired. Tired of the fight, tired of the betrayal, but resolute in his mission to rebuild and protect what mattered most. As they walked out of the courtroom, Sarah made a quick phone call, her words muffled but urgent. She had no time to waste, no time to wallow in defeat. But deep down, she knew the truth, that she had lost the most important battle of all. Meanwhile, Ethan walked out of the courtroom, his daughters waiting for him. They were sitting outside, their little faces bright with excitement. They didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation, but they knew one thing. Their father had fought for them, and that was all that mattered. "Daddy!" Mira shouted as she ran toward him, Lena following close behind. "We won, right?" Ethan knelt down, pulling them into a tight hug. "Yes, we did. We won." Lena looked up at him, her eyes full of trust. "Does that mean we'll stay together?" Ethan's heart clenched. He didn't want to lie to them, but he also didn't want to burden them with the weight of what had just happened. "Yes, baby. We're staying together. We'll always be together." The girls smiled, their laughter ringing through the hallway as they made their way out of the courthouse. Ethan could feel the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. It wasn't just about winning in court, it was about his family, and that, to him, was the ultimate victory. As they walked to the car, Ethan took a deep breath, ready to start the next chapter of their lives. A new chapter, one where they would heal, grow, and build something stronger than before. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that with his daughters by his side, he could face anything. The days after the lawyers' meeting passed in a blur. Ethan walked through his life like a man who had been awakened from a long, deep sleep. The weight of what had transpired still hung heavy in the air, but he was no longer drowning in it. His mind had started to organize the chaos, arranging each piece in its rightful place. But every now and then, the reality of what he had lost would hit him like a sudden wave, unexpected and overwhelming. His daughters were a constant source of strength. They had become his anchor in the storm, their laughter and innocence a balm for his wounded heart. But even their presence couldn't shield him from the growing realization that his wife, the woman he had built a life with for nearly 2 decades, had chosen to walk away. She had slipped through his fingers like sand, leaving him with nothing but memories and unanswered questions. One evening, as he sat in his study staring at the stack of legal documents on his desk, a notification pinged on his phone. It was a message from his lawyer, Rob Kinley. The message was brief but to the point. Geneva's lawyer wants to settle. She's willing to agree to your terms. Ethan didn't know what he felt in that moment. Relief, frustration, anger, or just plain exhaustion. His heart was conflicted, torn between the hope that this nightmare would finally be over and the bitterness of having to negotiate the remnants of a marriage that was supposed to last forever. He set his phone down and stared at the documents, his mind racing. The custody battle had been fierce, but he was determined to protect his daughters above all else. They were his priority, but the emotional toll had been immense. He had been forced to face a version of himself he didn't recognize, a man who had been broken but was now rebuilding, brick by brick. That night, he lay awake, thinking about the decision that lay before him. The message from his lawyer wasn't just a legal victory, it was a personal one. But could he truly let go of the woman he had loved, the woman who had once been his everything? Could he really close that chapter of his life and move forward? As he lay there, a sense of clarity began to settle over him. The past was gone. What mattered now was the future, his daughter's future, and he knew without a doubt that he would fight for them, no matter the cost. The next day, he called Rob and told him to arrange the meeting. He was ready to sign the final papers, ready to end this chapter and start a new one. But when he arrived at the lawyer's office, he was met with a cold, empty room. The only person there was Rob, who stood by the window, looking out at the city skyline. "She's not coming," Rob said, his voice low. Ethan's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Geneva, she's gone. She left a note. She's moving to the West Coast. A fresh start, she says. She won't fight for custody. She won't sign anything." Ethan felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath him. He had spent so many months preparing for this moment, only to find out that Geneva had given up without a fight. "Is this really happening?" he muttered to himself, the weight of it all settling in his chest. Rob nodded. "She's gone, for good." The news of Geneva's sudden departure felt like a punch to Ethan's gut. The emotional chaos had been building up for months, but now it felt like the final act in a play that he had never wanted to be part of. He had been ready for the fight, for the court battles, for the negotiations that would secure his daughter's future. But this was something else entirely. Geneva had left without a single word of explanation, no real closure, no apology, just a note, a gesture that felt as cold and impersonal as the divorce papers he had signed. Ethan stood at the window of his lawyer's office, staring out at the city that had once felt like a safe place, a home where everything made sense. Now, it was a blur of confusion and missed opportunities. The skyline, which once symbolized ambition and hope, now mirrored his inner turmoil. He had spent his whole life building something, a family, a career, a future, and now it all seemed to be crumbling in front of him. "She's gone," Ethan repeated to himself, trying to make sense of the words. "She's really gone." It felt surreal. His mind raced with 1,000 questions. Why had she left without a fight? Why had she given up on their family so easily? They had built a life together, raised 2 daughters, shared their dreams and fears. And now, it was all reduced to a single note, a few hastily written words on a piece of paper. "Ethan," Rob's voice cut through his thoughts. "I know this isn't easy, but we need to talk about next steps. We can still protect the girls. We can still make sure everything is handled properly. You've done everything you can to secure their future." Ethan turned slowly, taking in Rob's words. He knew his lawyer was right. His priority had always been and would always be his daughters, but that didn't mean the pain of this situation didn't cut deep. Every day had been a battle, and now it felt like all of that had been for nothing. Geneva had walked away, and the silence that followed was deafening. But she didn't even try, Ethan said, his voice shaking with emotion. She didn't fight for us. She just left. She left without a word. Without a fight. Rob walked over to Ethan, placing a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes people don't know how to fight. Sometimes they choose to run instead. It's not about you, Ethan. It's about her. She chose this path. But you have to keep moving forward. You have to think about the girls. They need you now more than ever. Ethan nodded, his mind swirling with Rob's words. He knew he had to focus on his daughters. They were his reason for pushing through this dark chapter, his reason for continuing to fight. He couldn't afford to let the anger, the confusion, and the sadness consume him. He had to stay strong for them. Later that evening, as Ethan sat in the quiet of his townhouse, he couldn't help but think about Geneva. He had always thought that love was enough, that love could fix anything. But now, as he sat in the stillness, he realized that love alone wasn't always enough to hold people together. Sometimes people drift apart even when they don't want to. Sometimes the cracks become too wide and the distance becomes insurmountable. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to push the thoughts away, but they lingered, the unanswered questions echoing in his mind. Was there something he could have done differently? Was there something he missed, something he could have said or done to make Geneva stay? He didn't have the answers, and maybe he never would. All he knew was that he couldn't keep asking those questions. The past was gone. What mattered now was the present. What mattered now was his daughters. The next morning, as he prepared breakfast for Lena and Mira, a knock at the door startled him. He wasn't expecting anyone. As he opened the door, he was surprised to find a package sitting on the doorstep. No return address, just a simple note attached. Ethan picked it up, his fingers trembling as he read the note. I'm sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you or the girls. Please understand that I had to go. I couldn't stay anymore. I need to find myself. Please don't hate me. Please take care of our girls. Geneva. He stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. The hurt, the betrayal, the anger, it all flooded back. But mixed in with all of that was something unexpected, understanding. Geneva had chosen to leave, but in doing so, she had taken control of her own life, even if it meant sacrificing the family they had built together. Maybe in her own way, she was doing what she thought was best for herself. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the tears come, but not out of anger or sadness. They were tears of release, tears that washed away the last remnants of the life he had known. He couldn't change what had happened. But he could change how he moved forward. He could rebuild. He could make sure that his daughters knew they were loved, that they were safe, and that no matter what, he would always be there for them. As he placed the letter in a drawer and walked back to the kitchen, he felt a quiet sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't the peace of having all the answers. It wasn't the peace of having everything fixed. It was the peace of knowing that he was moving forward, one step at a time. Ethan looked at Lena and Mira, who were sitting at the table, their small hands holding on to their cups of juice. Their eyes were full of trust, full of hope. And in that moment, he knew that everything would be okay. No matter what, they would be okay. The days following the arrival of Geneva's letter passed in a blur. Ethan focused on the girls, keeping their routine intact and ensuring that their world stayed as stable as possible. Each morning, he would wake up early, prepare breakfast, help them with their homework, and take them to school. It was in the simplicity of these everyday moments that he found peace, grounding himself in the present, focusing on what he could control, his daughters, their future, and his own healing process. But the weight of everything that had transpired over the past few months, the emotional whirlwind, the divorce, Geneva's departure, never fully left him. It lingered like a shadow at the edge of his mind, a constant reminder of the life he had once hoped for and the life he was now forging alone. One evening, as he was finishing up dinner with Lena and Mira, there was a knock on the door. It wasn't unusual to have someone stop by, especially with the girls having playdates or their classmates coming over. But this time, the knock felt different. There was a hesitation in the rhythm of the knocks, a quiet uncertainty that made his heart beat a little faster. He opened the door to find Maria standing there, holding a small envelope in her hands. Ethan's stomach tightened, as he could feel the weight of whatever news was inside that envelope. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice tinged with concern. "I think you should read this." With a nod, he took the envelope from her, his hands shaking slightly. Inside, there was a letter, this time not from Geneva, but from someone else. As he opened it and began to read, his heart sank. It was from Silas Dubrienne, the man who had taken Geneva from him. Ethan had known that Silas was a part of Geneva's life, but the man had never really seemed to matter. Now his words carried a finality that Ethan wasn't prepared for. "Ethan, I'm sure you're wondering why I'm writing to you. The truth is, I've never wanted to be part of the chaos you and Geneva created, but I'm forced to step in now. Your divorce is almost finalized, but I believe I need to make it clear that I'm not going anywhere. Geneva and I are committed to building something together. I understand this may be hard for you, but you need to come to terms with the fact that we are a family now. I will be part of your daughter's lives from here on out. Sincerely, Silas Dubrienne." Ethan's hand clenched around the letter, his fingers digging into the paper as his mind raced. His first instinct was anger, raw, unbridled fury. The idea that Silas was insinuating himself into their lives, into his daughter's lives, was a line he could not and would not allow to be crossed. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the emotions were overwhelming. This was not just a man who had stolen his wife. This was a man now claiming ownership of the family they had built. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Mira's soft voice calling from the kitchen. "Daddy, what's wrong?" He turned to face his daughters. Both of them were standing at the doorway, their wide eyes full of concern. Lena's hand reached for Mira's, and Ethan could see the anxiety on their faces. They had sensed something was wrong. Ethan forced a smile and knelt down to their level. "It's okay, sweetheart. There's just some things I need to handle. You don't need to worry about it." "But Daddy," Mira's voice trailed off, and Lena added, "Are we okay? Will everything be okay?" The weight of their words hit Ethan like a ton of bricks. His daughters were seeking reassurance. They wanted to know that no matter what had happened, their world wouldn't come crashing down. They needed to believe that no matter how hard things got, they would always have their father by their side. He took a deep breath and pulled them into a hug. "We're going to be okay," he said, his voice steady. "You and me will always be okay. I'll always protect you. Nothing is more important to me than you two." For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't fighting for some ideal of family anymore. He wasn't fighting for Geneva. He was fighting for his daughters, for their future, for their happiness. Everything else, everything he thought he had wanted, no longer mattered. The letter from Silas only solidified what he had to do. It wasn't just about winning. It wasn't about beating Silas or making him pay. It was about making sure his daughters had a home that was stable, a place where they could feel safe and loved despite the chaos that had engulfed their family. Ethan spent the next few hours in silence, his thoughts focused solely on the road ahead. He knew the battle was far from over. Geneva's abandonment had shaken him, but it had also given him the strength he needed to take control. He would never let Silas or anyone else take what was his. His daughters would be his priority, and nothing, not even Silas's words, could change that. The next day, Ethan sat down with his attorney, Rob Kinley, and they began drafting a response. This wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about protecting the future of the girls he loved more than anything. "We're not going to let him control us," Ethan said firmly, his jaw clenched with resolve. "If Silas thinks he can just waltz into our lives and claim ownership, he's wrong. He's going to learn exactly what it means to mess with someone who will do anything to protect their family." Rob looked at him with a quiet understanding, nodding. We'll make sure of that. That evening, after a long day of legal work and preparations, Ethan sat down at the kitchen table with Lena and Mira. He made them their favorite dinner, pizza, and a movie night, something simple but familiar. They ate, they laughed, and for just a moment, things felt like they had before the chaos, before the betrayal. Later, as the girls went to bed, Ethan found himself standing outside their rooms, looking in at their peaceful faces. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he would protect them. He would make sure they never had to face the world alone. As the quiet of the night settled over him, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. It wasn't the peace of having everything fixed or resolved. It was the peace of knowing that he had made the right choice, that he had chosen his daughters, that he had chosen to fight for their future, no matter the cost. He closed the door to their rooms, turned off the light, and walked back into the kitchen, ready to face whatever came next.